Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time you are joining us. Welcome to another episode of Pages to Progress. I did calculate what episode this is, but I can't remember what episode I had in my head, what number it was. Yeah, we're on episode 90 something. Welcome.
97?
No, I think it was lower than that. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Welcome to the next episode of the one before, where we have been looking at the book by Ben McBride, Trouble in the Water. Dee, do you mind holding up the book for us so that we can see? This is the book that we're in. If you want to follow along the journey, you can. Go to the description, click the link, and you'll have access to where you can obtain that book digitally or physically. But we'd love you to join this journey. The questions that we ask ourselves and the discussions that we have, it's an open forum, and we'd love you to be able to weigh in the comments if you want to, or just listen in as we agree, disagree, and struggle through these pages. But that is the purpose of Pages to Progress, to be challenged and to see how God speaks to us through those challenges. I'm joined here with Darlene, with Annabelle, with Jessica, and we are ready to dive into chapter 4, entitled Confront Your Biases. I'm going to start how I ended this chapter, and then we'll see where we go. Right at the end of this chapter, Ben McBride essentially asks us to take a very practical inventory of the top 10 people in your life. And I did the exercise. I went through, I listed 10 people in my life that I think are probably the closest or I interact with the most. And where is it? Here it is. And I then looked at their race, their gender, their age, their religion, their sexual orientation, and their political identity. Political identity was a hard one because I had to guess with some people. But I think I'm pretty much close to what it is. But at the end of the exercise, after I listed all of my 10 people, their race, their gender, their age, their religion, sexual orientation, political identity, I then had to ask myself the question, okay, so who isn't showing up in the demographics of that friendship, of those friendship groups? And those are potentially where you might find your biases. Here are mine. I'm happy to share. This is not for me to ask you, ladies, to share yours. You don't have to. I'm just sharing mine to say I potentially have biases amongst children and youth, non-SDA people, queer people, and Republicans. Those are my potential biases that and it's not a one size fits all. Obviously, it's just a tool that he uses to try and help us think about our biases in different ways. And I have to say that there's probably definitely some light bulbs clicking on in different ways. I've always been scared of children and youth. Um,
That's
I
surprising
yeah,
because you're they're very comfortable with you.
oh, that's good to know. Sure, I'll take
I
your word
we
for it.
my daughter is like, yes, and we're going to go visit. We're going to see Pastor Sam, and
I am glad that she has that. No, I find children easier. Youth are the scariest to me.
Mm,
Um, I guess the one biggest thing that I find with youth is that I have nothing to relate with them. We grow up in completely different worlds, which is probably not as true as the narrative I put out in my head. But there are some things that I definitely do find I place a bias on, and I make judgment calls when I see certain young people do certain things, and I assume certain things about them.
mm,
Um, that definitely happens a lot when I meet youth and I think to myself, I build a picture. What are you like? I do build a picture of those who I think are politically Republican. I build a picture of them in my mind. I do kind of build a picture, definitely, for non-SDAs to some degree, although there's a bit of uncertainty there. And I definitely do build a picture with queer people however they identify in their sexual orientation. I found it really interesting. This chapter was really a dive into my personal biases and ways upon which we can try and identify them and move forward. But I'm curious to know you ladies, what was your experience of this chapter? What popped out for you that you thought was quite interesting?
It's interesting to me because I started this chapter and as I'm reading through it, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, 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 not really hearing anything different, what have you. I like the fact that he discussed kind of like this education or class distinction in terms of, power within the race itself. He's discussing, these kids, they come to him, they make
Mm.
this disclosure, but he chooses to side with the cops.
Yep.
And one thing that popped into my mind was, well, is it an emotional fatigue? And, is it, you
On
know,
whose part?
his part? So, I'm giving, I'm giving, I'm giving, it's just way easier for me to, to connect with and I don't want to say side with, but team with the person that I'm working with.
Yeah.
So, kind of admitting to that emotional fatigue. Um, the other thing too was, I when I did the when I did the assignment, it was very interesting because I felt kind of embarrassed by um, my how I felt about my list and who I wasn't okay with putting on the list. And, I thought to myself, well, what about this person? Should this person be on the list? But there was this, my bias was more so intellectual challenge. This person is not as intellectually capable as me, and
Mm,
therefore, I have trouble with them being on the list, which is
mm.
very, it doesn't connect with me. It's very silly, when I say it out loud. Um, I I wouldn't say religion was a part of my list. Um, I I would say sexuality and gender identification was something that was missing from my list. Um, I'm even looking at my list right now. A huge part of my list was more about um, what I noticed about my list was not necessarily how deeply I connected with people, but more so about um, the familial intimacy. Um, so I talk about being an immigrant in this country, and the fact that as an immigrant you kind of learn to hold tight to your family members that you come with if you're
Mm.
lucky, and so I do feel as though that was a huge part, as I look through my list, that was a huge part of my list was more so an immigrant population. I think that there was maybe one person on the list that was born bred American.
Interesting.
Um, so
Interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I definitely relate to the whole intellectual thing. Um, for me, it was accents.
that's interesting.
So, so in England, we're definitely biased towards people with a northern accent.
Mhm.
Those who have a northern English accent are, at least the narrative that is told is, you are stereotypically less intelligent than someone who has a southern British accent.
Interesting.
And it's and that. all it is just a narrative. I'm realizing because it's obviously not true. It's just you have this accent because of where you were born and where you grew up. And yet it has become such a trope that was communicated all throughout my childhood,
Hmm.
all on the media, all on comedy sets, and you name it. And so you end up, without questioning, believing it. So
Mm.
now, when I came into contact with people who had Northern accents, without even thinking about it too much, I've already lowered them in my mind.
Interesting.
That, but yeah, that's a kind of a similar kind of thing that I noticed as I read through this book. What about you, Jessica and Dee?
Um, One of the things that I noticed in my list was that there's not a lot of white people in my list. There's only one person that is really close to me, and most of my friendships, close friendships, are not Christians.
Hmm.
So my bias, and actually I just had some conversation about it recently, it is with Christian people.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
Like
I share that. Yeah.
I take a step back and I try to figure it out. What type of Christian are you? Are you
Hmm.
the Christian that judges other people? That's my first thought that it pops to my head when people says I'm Christian. I think Republican, conservative, Christian. That's my
Mm.
first thought. But then I have to okay, no, no, no. I'm not everybody's the same. Take a step back.
Hmm.
And that's where my bias comes. I notice that I only have one white friend close to my circle and two Christian friends out of my whole circle, my 10 people.
Hmm.
And that's when I was like, oh, so yeah, that's my bias. I have like to jump to think that if you say I'm Christian, to get this idea, oh, you're very conservative, you're very, and I have come to learn that not everybody is like that, but it's a bias. It's my first instinct
Hmm. Yeah.
that you're judged.
And it's
Uh-huh.
connected, is it connected to politics or is it connected to a sense of cultural spirituality?
Both of them.
Mm,
It's about political, it's about culture also, and also like how I see my faith
mm,
and
mm,
how I live my faith and the experiences that I have had with Christians.
mm, mm,
So one is like I could say like a trauma response maybe, like I don't know, like the experiences that I have with Christians, it has built this idea that as soon as you say, oh, I'm Christian, it's just like
mm.
and
Interesting.
then I realized when I was doing my list, I only have two Christian friends in my whole list, and only one of them is white.
I'm the other one.
No, no.
Okay, I'm joking. But
Oh,
that's
but
interesting.
yeah, and I also noticed like most of the people in my inner circle are like Latinos.
Hmm.
It's like, oh, like I do have another like there's a white person, there's two black people in the mix, but the majority of them are Latinos.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
But that's not the only biases that I have there. Like I can actually point a finger and be like,
Right, right, right.
I have a bias again with white people. I even told Sandra last time, like
Hmm.
I feel uncomfortable when I'm in a
Hmm.
dom- predominant.
A majority white space.
Yes,
Hmm.
yeah. So those are like my biases,
Hmm.
and it's
Really,
based in experiences.
yeah, really interesting. Uh, Before I chime in, Dee, did you want to reflect?
Yeah, I think my list I had so I based my list on the amount of time I spent.
Okay.
or the amount of conversations or talks I have with people, and
Hmm.
it's all over the place. I had people with different um, gender, um, what do you say, gender demonstration, gender, how they
Identity.
Identity.
identity. I have different people with sexual orientations, people from all over the different countries. I think it's because of my work.
Mm.
It's because of my work. And also, but even with among the Seventh Adventists, it is all over. It's not just
Hmm.
Americans, or it's all over. But to be honest with you, it makes me like wonder, like where do I really belong? Like, do I really have a like this pack? You know, I don't know, but I I enjoy being with everyone. But
Mm.
Mm.
yeah, but that's what I found. Yeah, even I think, but most, and also I have to say, like, my most closest inner circle are Seventh Adventists, but uh, um, I have plenty of people basically. Yeah, again, I think it's just because of my work.
Mm.
Yeah, but
So
Pastor Sam, oh sorry,
now go
but
on.
going back to what you were talking about, growing up with this, this automatically assuming with people with a strong accent, like northern accent, is that coming from the whole British, history and just
Yeah.
the
It comes
biases with the
it comes from
Ireland?
elitism. It comes from elitism.
Yeah, yeah, but is that toward, did it start toward this feeling toward biases toward the Irish people?
It started because of with anyone who doesn't have a London accent.
Hmm.
That's
Or
how it.
even within the people who were born and grew up in England,
Yeah, it started with anyone.
automatically.
Yeah, it's the London accent is right at the top.
Yeah, because I've heard that, I've read that.
Yeah.
Michael Caine talks about it a lot. He talks about the Cockney accent
Mhm.
and how he's so proud of, coming from a different
Mhm.
not culture, but a different part of England and not wanting to suppress that. But there's
Mhm.
some really cool YouTube videos about it.
Yeah. It's a really interesting topic. How I understood how bias he tried to define bias was really interesting. It's kind of like this internalized preference or prejudice that kind of colors the way that you view others. In other words, I find that biases, when I went through my list, I had to ask myself, okay, biases. When I see these people, do I discount them in any way? Do I maybe think less of? Do I think I am better than, or things like that? And I realize it's quite a rigorous thing to do if you've never done it before, or you are convinced that you maybe aren't as biased as some people are. And that was, yeah, it was nice to see how this black man was doing his best to uncover his own biases
Hmm.
bit by bit and very humbly. Like I wish I could find it. It's you just mentioned it, Annabelle, when he sided with the police, and he said he did what was comfortable or did what felt safe to him or easy was to side with the police rather than siding with the actual young person who has gone through various different struggles here and there. It got me thinking about some of our biases are actually created out of comfort, um, and
Hmm.
convenience and
Hmm.
security, and it's just easier.
Yeah.
It's just easier to navigate life if we just operate from this bias.
Yeah.
Um, And now I've really started to question, so what does it look like for me to navigate a world free from those bias? Is it uncomfortable, therefore? Is it more painful to navigate a life like that? Is it
We mean living a life without biases?
yeah.
I mean, like when I first started this chapter, I mean, like the only thing that I got alarmed initially to live without biases because as a woman, I think Jessica and Annabelle must have to agree with me on this. Probably, most likely that it was like alarm bell going off in my head. Like I can't live without certain biases in the areas of safety and security. And he mentions that. I was like, so when I got to that section of the chapter, I was like, "Ooh, I'm glad he sees this and he understands and why, especially as a woman, we need that. Like I couldn't possibly live without it, and it's sad we cannot live without it. I wish we didn't have to, you
What do
know.
you, I don't understand. What do you mean? Like, can you say more?
So like for example, like let's say, especially okay, recently, okay, there was, I think it was a TikTok. I'm not on a TikTok or anything like that, but I read about it, okay? Is that I think it was on a TikTok where there was a like a survey going around. It was a question was asked to women. So if you're in the woods alone, hiking or whatever, and you come across, okay, do you rather come across a bear or do you rather come across a man? And most women chose a bear.
Yeah.
And I too
I
myself would
chose the
choose
bear.
a bear, okay? Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is the
Instinctively,
kind
instinctively,
of thing that women have to live with. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. That's really
Wait,
cool.
wait. So I want to try and make a distinction here, and uh, forgive me if I'm not homing in exactly on the point, and help me out here. Are we talking about fear or are we talking about bias? Because
Well,
bias is something where we essentially discount and think lower of. Fear is a reaction, a feeling reaction, no?
No, it's just a
it's
bias against it's a bias toward men, just men in general.
I mean, a bias, the thing is that yes, you can discount, but the thing is that it's not just intellectual, right?
Yeah.
It's not just an
Mm,
automatic thought process. There is emotion that comes along with that, right?
mm,
Mhm.
And, even when you looked at your 10 people, the first question I had, in my mind, I wondered how everyone felt when they looked at their 10 people. I
mm,
wondered how they instinctively felt about it. Because the thing is that when we encounter bias, we're not we're not we're not deliberately, saying to ourselves, I do not like queer people, or I do not like transgendered people. Therefore, I will not speak to this person. It is an instinctive, emotional response that is both learned and
mm.
also emotionally felt.
Yeah, it is until we become aware of some things and they move from the unconscious to the conscious based upon exercises like this, conversations like this. It's only after I read this chapter I was like, accents. Yep. And the Americans do it too.
Yes,
in terms of a perspective of an accent on the south or the east or the west or whatever it is, you know.
Mexicans do it too. We do
I
it too. Depends if you were born in Mexico City or the northern part of the country or in the south, or even from other countries like Colombia, Argentina, like stuff like that. It depends where you're coming from, the accent you have. There's bias also.
Can I
Like
ask emotionally, how would you feel?
when it has happened to me, it feels like it hurts because you have no control over where you grow up, where you
Mm.
were born.
And
You
when
know
you
what I mean?
encounter, yes, but when you encounter someone who is considered less than in terms of their accent.
I when I notice it, I'm kind of like very, very self-aware, and as soon as I notice it, I try to think about. that doesn't define the person.
Me personally, I'm very avoidant. And that's something that I loved about this exercise. That for me, I had to sit down and face this because I can tell you, I am very avoidant. In Jamaica, same deal, colonial, colonialism, like did a number on many different countries. But I had to sit down and face, there was one person that I would have added, but instinctively I said, mm-mm, and I was thinking about the way she spoke. And it was I felt hurt.
Oh,
I
wow.
felt hurt. And then I said, and then I, not said, but I felt hurt and then kind of dismissed it and went
Hold
along
on.
with
You
my
felt
dog.
hurt about the way
Not
you were
added.
thinking?
Yes.
So you hurt yourself because you felt like you should have had a better value system?
And instinctively, I kind of said, let's forget this and get back to the dog. Get back to walking the dog.
As any good avoidant person would do.
Yeah. But as any, if you think about it, as any racist would do, maybe.
Yeah. We all choose our ways to try and navigate or not navigate.
And be colorblind and all that kind of jazz.
In the name of whatever noble achievement.
Comfortable.
Yeah. And
comfortable.
It is the case. Definitely. I tried to think to myself, how do some of these biases show up in our church and in our community? We discussed a little bit about the dynamics of conservative and liberal, and I think, yeah, okay, that's definitely one dynamic. But I'm wondering if you can recognize, are there other ways that biases tend to show up within our church community, within Christians?
I think one bias which I think is a bias that I see it repeatedly over and over happening, is we think that if someone comes to church every Saturday, they're automatically a good Christian, and that they should have a place on the church board and maybe take on a bigger responsibility. I mean, of course, there is a thought that says if you're not coming to church consistently, then maybe you're not ready to take on a more responsible role. Yeah, that's rational thought, but I think there is definitely that bias that
so we ascribe spirituality to presence, to actual.
Yeah,
interesting.
That's very interesting because for me, I grew up and I think it came, became present in my 10 people as well. I think in my 10 people, there are 2 people who were SDA. And there was a part of me that was proud of that because I grew up in a family where, my mom was Christian, but she was a stay-at-home Christian. My dad was an atheist, still is an atheist, very much challenging me with my faith. And I instinctively thought to myself, ooh, I'm glad I have these people to challenge me continuously in my faith. And it's interesting because I see the Adventist person, the Adventist man or woman coming to church and the head deacon coming to church and working and taking on all sorts of different roles, and they're not resting in the Sabbath. They're not an example of what it is to be an Adventist, at least. I don't know, at least this was the thought process that I had.
I definitely see that in some respects. What about classism? Do you think that we have a level of classism within the Christian circles, within the Adventist circles that you see?
Classism as in based on finance?
Could be
or
finance, it could
profession?
be status, it could be profession. I think it covers all of those things. You know, I remember, this is a real story for Eastside. I remember there was a couple that came to Eastside one time. Eastside love to eat. They just love to eat. They're beautiful people. Will go to restaurants and check out all kinds of great stuff. And to some people who don't have the budget, it can be quite challenging if you're constantly going to restaurants or you get invited to certain places. And I remember this particular couple, we had a conversation about it. They didn't exactly have the kind of budget to go out eating to restaurants on a regular basis. But I do remember that they eventually made their decision to move away, and not because they didn't think that Eastside weren't wonderful people, is they literally couldn't afford to socialize in that space. And it was quite a big wake-up call to me, because I was wondering to myself, all right, so how do we even navigate that? And I'm still working through that. But I realized to myself that even within, for instance, whatever budget someone is working with, we can have perspectives of people, and we can think that they are less than, in terms of, if they earn less, maybe they don't work as hard. Sometimes we can tie that to people's spirituality as well. And we have our own diagnostic indicators as to who we think are the most spiritual people in our lives, based upon how they behave, or how they speak, or how they act.
It has, wow. I'm not sitting here going, wow, because it has never like occurred to me to assign spirituality to someone just because of their profession or because of their financial status, that they might, because they're earning less, they have a less spirituality. I mean, that's just, I don't know.
But it is a very real thing. And
really,
I've been there.
People would actually do this. I mean, that's
yes,
really just,
Yes.
Yeah, I've
Yes.
seen it. I've seen it
I mean,
in other
wow,
churches.
that's
Not at, I haven't seen it at Eastside. I haven't been long enough, but I've seen it in other churches that,
wow.
certain people are assigned to elder roles as elders and all of that jazz.
Yeah,
Oh,
sorry.
because they have certain profession
Yep.
and making
They have,
certain money.
yeah,
Status.
yeah.
Status, or the amount of respect that you are willing to give to someone because of your perspective of who they are and what they are like. I won't give respect to that person, but I'll give respect to that person because they have the qualifications, so they don't have the qualifications. And sometimes it's done on a very, very subtle subliminal level. So it got me thinking about some biblical examples, about some tie-ins of where I see the nature of embracing the world of diversity really does stem biblically. The story came and hit me in the book of Acts, where Peter has this dream of a large cloth being let down tons of different animals, and it wasn't some kind of quest of you must be vegetarian. It was more of a notion of there are all kinds of different people with all kinds of different cultural backgrounds, all kinds of different perspectives, all kinds of different worldviews, ideologies, and yet they are all God's people under one. And if I'm honest, that picture of a community of God is quite an uncomfortable picture.
Why?
Because we like what we like. And anyone who comes along, for some of us, we can embrace the difference until someone does it the wrong way. Until someone doesn't do it our way, or someone doesn't believe what we believe. Holding space for people to come and bring their biases and allow that community to grow to better perspectives and stories is the essence of what I think the church community should be about. And I think I think it's a bit romantic to suggest that we can all come bias free and just get along and be harmonious and all be adaptive and all. The reality is some people's stories offend us. And the call of Christianity is to call them our brother or sister, however they have navigated their lives, whatever it is. There are some people I've not met them, maybe celebrities, politicians, who I don't want to meet because I don't know if I can be the ambassador Jesus needs me to be. And I think it's really important to recognize your role, which can help determine the kind of relationship you have with someone. So take, for example, Ben McBride. I think he recognized his role as a bridger between the young people and the cops. And once he recognized that role, he had to realize, actually, I've got to change my perspective because I have a job to do.
And it took him a while. It took him a while. I mean, thinking about, from the start of his pastoral role, the 2 jobs at the church, and then all the way up until the, I don't know, social justice movements that he was involved in. It took him a while.
Yeah.
I don't know. The one woman in the Bible, for whatever reason, I love and I truly associate myself with is Mary Magdalene. And just her humility and her desire for the Lord, and, to the point of this very reckless, very dirty kind of love, if you will. I picture her, bowing and, washing and, Jesus's feet with her hair and with her tears and
filled with the biases going on in the
right,
room while it's happening.
right. But to hear how Jesus accepts her regardless of, what anyone else is thinking, or saying. I mean, that is the definition of who we should be as Christians, as evangelists, as Adventists, if you will.
Yeah, amen to that. Darling Jessica, do you have any examples that spring to mind where you think Jesus fiercely fights against biases and fights to try and
Yeah, I
see
mean,
people?
like his whole ministry was that right? I mean, fighting against the biases, especially the Jews against the non-Jews, right? I mean, that was huge. And I I I mean, he truly taught and lived out, inclusivity. That was him. And yeah, and as a Christian, as a follower of Christ, that's how we need to live. I mean, really, if we cannot live like that, we have no business going up to heaven. We don't belong up there. Really, I don't think we'll be up there if we don't truly live it here.
That's a good point, actually. I want to pause there just for a second. It's tempting to have a very escapist view of this earth and this sinful life and our implicit biases that or explicit biases that we hold and think. It's so tempting to sometimes say, when Jesus comes, he'll fix everything and we'll all be okay. And then we'll all have perfect minds and we'll all get on and we'll be fine. But I think what's less talked about is this notion of Christ wanting us to experience heaven in this not so heaven-like place. And there is something about that enables us to surpass the challenges that we currently have to exist. Because Jesus did say over and over again, the kingdom of heaven is near, the kingdom of heaven has come. It is here. It is not there. It is, sure, later on the prophecies tell us, split the sky, we go home, create new world, bring us back down to earth, sure. But there's something here in the messy chaos of all these stories and stereotypes and biases and perspectives and the way that we usurp ourselves over others or look down on, or even ourselves, the stereotypes that we align with. And I think it's really crucial to recognize that God has called us to live in the here and now, as messy it is, to uphold the values of the kingdom.
How do we do that when we consider the LGBTQIA community? I think, well, I know that I had voiced that. And while I might not be intellectually biased against this community, and sympathetic towards this community, going back to my Christian values, um, I don't know if it's me being avoidant, but Jesus did not speak on this community. I mean, what I know is of the Old Testament. Oftentimes, what I might do is, Jesus came and loved all people. I don't feel I can judge, and it's not my place to do so. I'm just curious because other people here mentioned that, and I wondered how they managed that.
I have a few thoughts. She's asking the question about how do we navigate essentially around the LGBTQ community and our biases in regards to that, and where does our Christianity sit in it? Am I correct, Annabelle?
Yes.
Yeah. So I have some thoughts, but I want to give the opportunity.
No, Pastor Sam, go ahead. You go ahead. You tell us what you think.
Oh, okay, sure. So from a Christian biblical perspective, we know what the ideals are. The ideals are quite explicitly put out in scripture. One man, one woman, that was the ideal, that was the given, that was the plan, the dream, whatever you want to call it. Now, other people might theologically disagree with that notion, and there are many people who have cases that God intended for all these kinds of things. But specifically from the Adventist perspective, I do strongly believe that this is our position of where we stand in the Bible, which has absolutely nothing to do with how we treat them. And I think that the distinction is between theology and practice.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that this isn't necessarily a question about the LGBTQ community, but it's more a question of how do we deal with people who don't have the same moral compasses that we do, decisions, choices, lifestyle, behaviors that we do. Because this is a broader question of, are we willing to accept people as members of our family that don't quite align with our belief systems and our behaviors? I'll share. We all have that one uncle who sits at the Christmas table and says all the inappropriate things. I don't care if it's an uncle, an auntie, whoever it is. There's that person, in your family that you just slightly cringe every time you because they push the bar out a bit too much, etc., etc. And they're not always the kindest of people, or they say the wrong things, or they're not quite aware. But you know what? That's my family member, and I love them. And I think that is what it means to be a part of this family. So in regards to the queer community, we can get into a theological discussion about right and wrong, ideal, non-ideal, biblical, non-biblical. But I think the greater question that Jesus does support is anyone who falls into the category of marginalized and oppressed unjustly. I think the Bible's clear as to where we're supposed to stand for those who are knocked down. That's my take. of how I wanted to
Amen.
bring across.
Amen.
I agree. I agree.
Amen.
I think Jesus demonstrated exactly that. That um, at the end of the day, it's how you interact with people, how you treat people, and you can know all the theology in this world, yet if you cannot love that, others in a way that Jesus wants us to love them, that theology can go out the window. I mean, really, it's so. I think it's very, yeah, it's two different things. I mean, I know my own theology. I know what I believe based on the Bible,
Hmm.
but I also know that um, I will never judge, like, whether you're transgender, you're homosexual. It doesn't matter. Like, you're gonna treat that person, as a human being. I mean, it's no different.
Let me try and push us towards an end with this question that just came to my mind as I thought about this. What's our point of call, or what's our process, or where do we go when we meet someone who exhibits clear biases that they cannot see or notice?
I did it. I did it recently with a friend of mine. And I'm going to be totally honest. When I wrote the text, I expressed how I felt about her bias, and I pointed it out in a very caring way. I never with a judgmental tone or anything. It's just like, this is what I think about this whole group of people. And I explained my reasoning. I never say you. I just say I'm having a hard time seeing these people using faith to harm marginalized communities.
Mm.
I'm really having a hard time with it. And I
Mhm.
explained myself and all that. And I
Mm.
was expecting, like, oh, I don't know, I never thought about it that way or anything. That person took offense of what I was saying. And
Mm.
it felt like I was directly attacking that person.
Mm.
Like her beliefs, and start justifying, like,
Mm.
I don't talk about this with friends, family, or anybody, so we don't create division. And have never said anything hateful to any marginalized community. And I am sorry if I ever say anything that offended the people you care about, or the people communities you care about. And I was like, it wasn't about me attacking you. I was just saying, like, I'm having a hard time understanding this group of people
Mm.
against this other group of people. But when I tried, because last one, I'm like, okay, so I'm not gonna get anywhere here. It's clearly that you took it like I'm trying to attack you or offend you. I'm just trying to set up the table for us to sit together. And, like, I'm the type of person that I'm willing to sit with you to try to understand where you're coming from, or
Mm.
why do you think the way you think.
Mm.
Like, I'm trying to give you the space for me to, like, I might not agree with you, but I want to understand where you're coming from with this.
Mm.
But
Mm.
instead of getting that, she got defensive. She got like, oh, you're attacking me. And I have to be like, oh, I'm not gonna get anywhere here. So that's what happens sometimes. And this is someone very, very close to me.
That sounds really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I found in the past that basically having to learn what language
Mm.
or what stage that they're at in terms of their bias. Are they a hardcore MAGA, I'm, in it for Donald Trump kind of person, or, are they the suburban mom who occasionally, has these thoughts and, but has some interest in, people of other cultures or what have
Mhm.
you.
Mhm.
Very different way to look at bias. And I find that for me, I find myself basically trying to speak their own language, if you will.
Mm,
And, oh, okay, yeah, Donald Trump, where are you at with that? Or, he has some interesting, ways about him. Because I find that if I hit them with my own perspective,
mm,
it is not a conversation, it becomes an argument,
mm.
it becomes a debate.
And us
And
and them.
right, and no one wins a debate.
Mm,
Nobody's listening to each other versus, a gentle tone approach where I'm listening to you and you're listening to me, if that makes any sense.
yeah, definitely. I think there is something, there's a there's a thread that I'm following throughout some of these comments and recognizing. You guys know it takes emotional maturity to be able to have some of these conversations with people. However, it takes spiritual maturity to step back and realize that people are on their own journeys
Mm,
and that every text message that we send in the beauty of love and reconciliation, or even just being vulnerable, may not produce the results that we want in this moment, in this time, and in this way, or maybe even ever. And that's the largest challenge about it, interacting with those who have biases. People who have biases, including us, we tell ourselves stories that we choose to believe,
mm,
and then we define our entire life on those stories.
mm,
um, and maybe this is why the important segue here for the Christian is to recognize that we need to stop writing these stories, and we need to allow God to write the stories for people, because when we write stories, they can be quite problematic for others, very problematic.
It's interesting as you say that. I wonder, are we're not the ones writing the stories. The stories come from a lot of authority figures, you
Mm,
know,
yeah.
social norms that we grew up with,
Mm,
um, words that were said around us
right,
oftentimes.
right.
And I wonder if the submission to the Lord, the surrender to the Lord, allows us to remove those stories and
And
to kind of face that avoidance. I,
or
I
to
don't know.
deconstruct those stories. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. I definitely see that 100%.
There's something that you said about understanding that people are not at the same place where we are in our journey. And that's one of the challenge I have faced this year. And I was talking recently with Sandra that I have realized that this year, what God needs me to do is just take a step back, like,
Mm,
and understand that not everybody is where I am. Not everybody has the same journey that I have with my faith.
mm,
And it doesn't make them less.
mm,
It is, we're in different progress right now.
mm,
We're in a
mm,
different path. And to be okay with that. And just to take a step back and just like, okay, it's not my to fix. It's
mm,
not my job to make them understanding. All I can do is pray and move on. And
mm.
it is hard. It's like really hard to want it to make people see your point of view or try to understand your point of view. And I'm happy to have people that is willing to be open and have that conversation. But when I talk to people who's not willing to or has their own biases, I had to learn to just take a step back and understand that we're just in different paths, and that's okay.
We also get really easily frustrated with slow progress.
Oh yes.
Mm-hmm.
We hate
Mm-hmm.
that. Um, but there are some things which I think that we need to do due diligence in realizing that we are not that powerful to change this entire world
Yes.
around. We are not messiahs. We are not saviors. We
Mm-hmm.
play a part in this kingdom agenda, sure, but to carry that kind of responsibility that it's up to us to do
Mm-hmm.
this is And I think that might be a bit more helpful to cause us to step back and realize slow progress is just as biblical as radical fast progress, you know.
Yes,
I'm reminded of the
yes.
story of um where Naaman came in the Old Testament and washed himself 7 times, and then
Mhm.
he was healed. And at the end, he speaks to the prophet and he asks permission. He says to him, "Can I go back to my country? And if you don't mind, when I go back into the pagan temple, even though I recognize God as my savior who just healed me through you, the prophet, can I bow my knee towards the idol?" And all the prophet says is, "Go in peace."
Mm,
That's all
mm,
the prophet says. Go in
mm,
peace. It speaks
mm,
to me about slow progress. That's what it speaks to. It speaks to me
mhm,
about a pagan guy who comes into an Israelite land, who meets the Israelite God, who heals this pagan guy, realizes, oh shoot, this God is real, then gets back, feels very uncomfortable to experiencing this Israelite God amongst his own people, doesn't want to be standing out like a sore thumb, doesn't want to be judged or anything, carries on kneeling down in the pagan temple with the blessing of the prophet who says, "Go in peace."
mm,
I don't think we're at peace when things are too much in slow motion for us.
mm,
I think we struggle in those instances to trust in God. Or maybe not. What I mean by trust, know that God is still in control despite that people are governed and defined by their biases as they
mm.
navigate this life. And I think that's something that's really quite something. We do have to end. Dee, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Well, I do think that we can stop biases, at least within ourselves.
Hmm.
I think, like the chapter talked about, it's raising our awareness, admitting that we all have biases, and raising that awareness. And when you come, and to a place where you recognize that, oh, right now I am operating
Mm-hmm.
from my biases,
Mm-hmm.
you can stop yourself, and
Mm-hmm.
you can literally turn and have a different thought, start with a
Yeah.
different thought.
Yeah.
um
I think a
yeah.
practical step to try and eliminate some of our biases is to hang out with the very community that we are biased against.
Mm,
Hmm.
mm,
And that's,
Humanizing them.
yeah.
That's what else I think about humanizing people. Uh, because I think what with our bias we dehumanize people.
Mm-hmm.
So and once you get to know them, I think we realize that, oh, I was wrong,
Mm.
or like I misjudged you. So yeah, I think that's a great point of view.
Or because we may not always come to the conclusion I was wrong or they are wrong, or whatever it is, it may be just an instance where you notice they have every right to be a child of God as much as
Yes,
you.
that you just said it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think
and
it's
that was my
also,
no. Go ahead.
no, I was gonna say, I think that and I wonder, sometimes the people that we are biased against, are identifying or make us feel as though we identify something within ourselves that are not quite right.
Hmm.
And I wonder if by spending time with these people, we acknowledge things that we feel within ourselves, insecurities
Hmm.
that are present in ourselves, and maybe hold it and accept it.
Hmm.
Um, or even just simply acknowledging that it's there.
Hmm. And on that note, we shall end there because I think we're almost up to the hour now. But
Yes.
we could talk for a long time about this subject, but I think that is proof in the pudding that there's more, that this is only probably just the first few steps. There's more to go. And we want to invite you into the rest of that process. If you've been following us on Pages to Progress, welcome again. You can click the link in the description and it will give you access to where you can get this book. Come join the conversation. We would love to hear your thoughts. And until the next week, where we go into the next chapter, which is entitled Expand the Circle, we hope you stay well. We hope you stay blessed. All right, then. Bye-bye.